It was one of those calm Sunday mornings when the world feels half asleep. Sunlight slid through the curtains, and the house smelled faintly of coffee and detergent. I sat at the dining table with my laptop, paying bills, doing what I always do, keeping things balanced, organized, predictable. Ethan was upstairs, singing in the shower, completely at ease. And for a moment, everything felt normal, until it didn't. One number, one name, stopped me cold. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I zoomed in, blinked twice, even refreshed the page. But there it was. Same transfer, same date, same amount, every single month. My stomach twisted as I read the recipient's name, Sophie M. I actually said it out loud, my voice trembling. No, it can't be. My chest tightened, that familiar name echoing through my mind like a ghost I never invited back. Sophie, his ex, the one we never talked about. I scrolled back through older statements, my fingers trembling against the touchpad. Each line confirmed it, month after month of quiet betrayal. Upstairs, the water stopped running, and I heard Ethan's light humming as he got dressed. My pulse quickened. I closed the laptop just as his footsteps hit the stairs. I smiled when he walked in, pretending nothing had happened. But inside, my thoughts were racing faster than my heart. I needed answers, and I'd get them. Ethan walked into the kitchen still humming, a towel draped around his neck, smelling like soap and aftershave, the same scent I used to find comforting. "Morning," he said, flashing that easy smile of his. I managed to return it, though my cheeks felt stiff, like they'd forgotten how. He poured himself coffee, completely unaware that our morning had just cracked open like thin glass. I watched him, studying every small movement, the way he stirred his cup, the way he avoided my eyes when he asked about my plans for the day. My voice came out steady, almost too steady. "Nothing special," I said, tapping my fingers against the mug. "Just catching up on bills." He nodded, grabbed his keys, and kissed my forehead before leaving, his lips warm but his presence suddenly foreign. When the door closed, I sat there in silence, my reflection staring back at me from the dark laptop screen. It was the kind of silence that hums, the kind that fills a room when your heart knows something your mind refuses to believe. I reopened the laptop, needing to see it again, as if the truth might change the second time around. But it didn't. Sophie M. Right there, bold as daylight. A name I hadn't said in years now burned into my retinas. I remembered her, the charming smile, the way Ethan had once spoken about her as if she were some unfinished chapter. Maybe she was. Maybe he never stopped reading it. The thought stung, sharp and deep, and before I knew it, my hands were shaking. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But I'd find out what he was hiding. The rest of the day moved like I was walking underwater, slow, heavy, muffled. I went through the motions: laundry, grocery list, cleaning up the breakfast dishes. But my mind kept circling back to that one name glowing on the screen: Sophie. Every time I thought I'd buried that part of our past, there she was again, resurfacing like something I'd tried too hard to forget. And now, Ethan was paying her, every month. My chest tightened at the thought. Was it guilt, pity, or something else entirely? That evening, I sat across from him at dinner, watching him chew, laugh, talk about his day, as if our lives were untouched by deceit. I nodded when he spoke, pretending to listen, but every word felt like background noise. I was cataloging details instead. His tone, his pauses, the flicker in his eyes when I mentioned bills. He had no idea I knew, and that gave me power I didn't expect to feel. Quiet power, dangerous power. When he kissed me goodnight, I kept my eyes open, staring into the dark. The lie between us pulsed louder than the ticking clock on the wall. I made up my mind right then. I wouldn't confront him out of anger. I'd wait. I'd plan. Because the truth wasn't just something I wanted to know. It was something I wanted him to feel. By the time dinner rolled around the next night, my pulse had settled into something calm, too calm. I'd spent the whole day rehearsing what I'd say, the tone I'd use, the way I'd look him in the eye without blinking. When Ethan sat down across from me, the clatter of cutlery and the faint smell of garlic filled the air. But beneath it all was the hum of my curiosity disguised as small talk. "Hey," I said lightly, twirling pasta on my fork. "Random question. Do you still talk to Sophie?" He froze, just for a second, then smiled that half smile I used to find charming. "Sophie? No, haven't heard from her in years." "Why?" His voice was casual, but his eyes darted just slightly to the side like a guilty tick. I took a sip of wine to hide my smirk. "Oh, just curious," I said, leaning back in my chair. "I saw her name pop up on an old Facebook memory today." The lie rolled off my tongue smoother than I expected. He laughed, too loudly. "Yeah, those things love to bring back ghosts." Ghosts. The word lingered between us, and for a moment, I wondered if he could hear my heart pounding beneath the table. I smiled, pretended to let it go, and changed the subject to something safe. Work, weekend plans, the neighbor's dog. But inside, I was burning. He had lied, without hesitation, without shame. And that told me everything I needed to know. After dinner, he offered to do the dishes, a rare act of domestic heroism. I watched him from the counter, his back turned, sleeves rolled up, soap bubbling under the warm water. It almost looked normal, like any married couple winding down after a long day. But all I could think about was how easily he'd lied to me just minutes before. The man I'd trusted for years could look me in the eye and rewrite reality as if it were nothing more than a bedtime story. When he finally dried his hands and kissed my temple, I almost laughed. "You okay?" he asked softly. "You seem quiet." Quiet. If only he knew what was screaming inside my head. I smiled and said, "Just tired," resting my hand briefly on his arm. My skin prickled where we touched, not from affection, but from the weight of pretense. He nodded, satisfied with my answer, and disappeared into the living room to watch TV, oblivious. Later that night, after he'd fallen asleep, I went to my office. The room smelled faintly of ink and printer paper, sharp, clean, decisive. I printed 3 months of bank statements, each page a piece of evidence lined with betrayal. The rhythmic hum of the printer felt almost soothing, mechanical, controlled. I slid the papers into a manila envelope and tucked them into my drawer. "You're paying her for something," I whispered to myself, the words steady now. "And I'll find out exactly what." The next morning, Ethan kissed me goodbye on his way to work, coffee in hand, humming like nothing was wrong. I stood by the door and watched him drive away, that same familiar car fading down the street, the same routine we'd repeated for years. But everything had changed. The air in the house felt heavier, charged, like it was holding a secret too big for its walls. I turned toward the drawer in my office where those printed pages waited, quiet but powerful. It's strange how paper can hold so much pain. Those statements were proof that love, when twisted, can turn into a transaction. Month after month, line after line, his guilt disguised as generosity. I wanted to storm into his office, throw the papers on his desk, and demand the truth. But I didn't. Because anger is loud and I needed to be silent, strategic. I wasn't ready to explode. I wanted him to hand me the match himself. That night, I watched him laugh over dinner again, pretending to be the man he used to be, and I played my role perfectly. The calm wife, the steady listener, the soft voice that didn't tremble. But inside, I was building something far stronger than rage. I was building control. He thought he was protecting his secret, but what he didn't know was that I'd already started planting the seeds of his undoing. By the next afternoon, my curiosity had turned into something sharper: resolve. I walked into the bank, the kind of place that always smelled like polished floors and quiet secrets. The clerk at the desk greeted me with a polite smile, but I could barely return it. My heart was thudding against my ribs as I explained that I needed clarification on some unusual activity. My voice sounded casual, almost rehearsed, though my palms were slick with sweat. The banker clicked away at her computer, her eyes darting across the screen. "Just to confirm," she said softly, "you're referring to recurring transfers to a Sophie Martin?" I nodded, pretending to look puzzled, but my breath caught when she continued. "Yes, same city, same recipient each month. The notes attached say, 'For you, always.'" Her tone was hesitant, as if she'd just stepped into something personal. I forced a smile, the kind you give when your heart is cracking but you refuse to let it show. "Thank you," I said, steadying my voice. "That's all I needed." She offered me a sympathetic look I couldn't bear to meet. I walked out of the bank, clutching my purse, the air outside suddenly too bright, too sharp. My mind was spinning. "For you, always." Those 3 words felt like tiny blades. Not guilt, not charity, affection. Ethan wasn't just paying for her bills, he was keeping her, piece by piece, in our lives. When I got home, the silence hit me first. The kind of silence that hums through your skin, thick and unkind. I set my bag down and went straight to the living room where our laptop sat open from that morning. Ethan was out. Thank God. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a second, trembling with hesitation, but curiosity won. I clicked into our shared email account, my heart thudding with every new tab that opened. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, maybe invoices, maybe something innocent. But then, I saw her name in his inbox, Sophie Martin. The first message was short. "Thank you, Ethan. I don't know what I'd do without you." My chest tightened. The second was worse. "You deserve this, Sophie. I'll keep helping until you're back on your feet." And then another, buried deeper, like a wound that hadn't healed. "I miss you too." I stared at those words until they blurred. My throat felt dry, my pulse uneven. The room spun in that way it does when your world suddenly shrinks to a single truth. You've been replaced in the story you thought was yours. I pushed the laptop shut and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The same ceiling we painted together 3 summers ago. The same house we'd built, brick by brick, promise by promise. And yet, somewhere between those walls, he'd found a way to build another life. My hands trembled as I whispered, "Helping her? With my money?" The words felt strange in the air, like a confession to no one. That's when something inside me shifted. Not just hurt, but clarity. I finally knew what I had to do next. I sat there for a long time, letting the betrayal settle in like a slow, poisonous fog. The anger came in waves. First disbelief, then humiliation, then something darker, quieter. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about how easily he'd managed to make me feel safe while he fed another woman's comfort behind my back. Every memory we had suddenly felt rewritten, edited, as if Sophie had been living in the footnotes of our marriage all along. I walked through the house, touching things without really seeing them. The framed photo from our anniversary, the coffee mug he always used, the jacket still hanging on the chair he'd left this morning. Everything looked the same, but it all felt contaminated. Love wasn't supposed to feel like an accounting error. I ran my hands through my hair and took a deep breath, trying to steady the rage pulsing through me. I wasn't going to cry. Not for him. Not anymore. Instead, I opened the drawer with the printed statements, pulling them out one by one. Each page was a confession he hadn't meant to write, a trail he never thought I'd follow. "For you, always," he'd said. I smiled bitterly. Fine. If he wanted to give Sophie something, I'd make sure it came at a cost. My mind began to sharpen, a plan forming at the edges of my grief. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come from fury. It comes from precision. That night, the house felt different. Still, but not peaceful, like the air was waiting for something to break. I set the table for two, just like always. But this time, the plates weren't for dinner. They were for truth. The printed statement sat neatly stacked beside an envelope with Sophie M. written across it in my careful handwriting. My hands didn't tremble anymore. I'd already cried all the tears I was ever going to cry. Now it was just silence and strategy. When Ethan walked in, his keys jingling, his tone was light. "Smells good," he said, smiling. He froze when he saw the papers. "What's all this?" I gestured for him to sit. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm, cold even. "Monthly transfers," I said. "To your ex. You've been sending her money for almost a year." His expression twisted fast, from confusion to fear to anger. He laughed, but it cracked halfway through. "It's not what you think." I tilted my head, watching him unravel. "Then what is it?" I asked. "Charity? Nostalgia? Or just boredom?" His face reddened. "She needed help. She lost her job," he stammered. I leaned forward, meeting his eyes. "So you became her sponsor? With our income?" My tone didn't rise, but my words cut clean. He opened his mouth to protest, but I didn't give him the chance. For the first time in a long time, I was the one controlling the room. Ethan pushed back from the chair, his voice growing louder with every word. "You're overreacting," he snapped, like volume could erase guilt. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. The man who once held my hand at our wedding now looked like a stranger defending a crime he didn't even have the decency to hide well. "Overreacting?" I repeated softly. "You lied to me. You took our money and gave it to her. Tell me, Ethan, how exactly am I supposed to react?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing, grasping for control. "It wasn't romantic," he said. "She just needed help. That's all." I almost pitied how rehearsed he sounded, like a man who'd practiced his defense in the mirror. "Help?" I asked, standing up slowly. "You don't send love notes with bank transfers to people you're just helping." His eyes darted to the envelope on the table. I could see the moment he realized the depth of what I knew. His silence told me everything his words couldn't. The room felt heavier now. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder, marking the seconds of his unraveling. He looked smaller somehow, like a man caught under the weight of his own deceit. I took a breath, calm and deliberate, and said, "You know what hurts the most? You didn't even try to hide it well. You thought I'd never notice, didn't you?" He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, and that silence, God, that silence, was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. I stood there for a moment, just watching him squirm under the weight of his own excuses. There was a time I would have cried, begged, tried to understand. But that woman was gone. The version of me that once needed his honesty had been replaced by someone who'd finally seen the truth in black and white. "You know what, Ethan?" I said, picking up the papers and sliding them toward him. "I'm not going to fight with you. You've already lost." He looked up at me, eyes desperate, voice cracking. "Rachel, please, don't do this. It was a mistake." I shook my head slowly. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary," I said, keeping my tone even. This was a choice you made, again and again." I grabbed my coat from the chair, the fabric brushing against my wrist like punctuation. "I hope she appreciates the money," I added quietly, walking toward the door. "Because she can have what's left of you, too." Behind me, I heard him call my name, but I didn't turn around. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and liberating. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one left in the dark. I was the one walking out of it. I didn't know exactly what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever happened now would be on my terms. And that realization felt like the first breath of freedom. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was still, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm, when everything looks the same, but nothing truly is. I brewed coffee, black and strong, and opened my laptop one last time. The numbers were all there, just waiting. I transferred half of everything in our joint account into my name. Clean, simple, legal. My hands didn't shake this time. It wasn't revenge out of rage. It was balance being restored. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost, careful and methodical. I called the bank to close the shared credit cards. I removed his name from the car insurance. I contacted a lawyer and handed over every piece of evidence, each statement, each email, every lie printed neatly on paper. "You'll keep the house," the lawyer said, scanning the documents. "He's violated financial trust." I smiled faintly. "Perfect," I replied. He paid for his own downfall, literally. When everything was ready, I packed slowly. I wasn't running away. I was walking out on my own terms. On the kitchen counter, I left a note folded neatly beside his empty coffee cup. "You wanted to support Sophie? Now you can. Alone." Then I took one last look around the home we'd built together, inhaled the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, and stepped outside. This time, there was no hesitation. Just peace. The next week unfolded like watching a slow collapse from a safe distance. Ethan called, texted, even showed up at my office once, but I didn't respond. My lawyer handled everything. Every frozen account, every document he hadn't bothered to read when I signed them. I'd learned that silence was more powerful than shouting. Let him sit in the quiet he created. Let him feel what it's like to lose something he assumed would always be there. Friends started to notice, of course. They asked questions, offered sympathy, whispered gossip. I kept my answers vague. "We're sorting things out," I'd say with a calm smile, sipping coffee like a woman who'd already made peace with the wreckage. The truth was, I didn't need to tell anyone what happened. My dignity was the only story I wanted to carry forward. The rest, his guilt, his shame, his excuses, belonged to him now. At night, I'd lie in bed and think about how easily people spend trust like loose change. How they forget that every small lie costs something. Ethan had spent everything he had without realizing the debt he was building. And when the bill came due, I made sure he paid in full. I didn't destroy him. I just let him face the math of his own betrayal. And somehow, that felt far more satisfying than revenge ever could. A few days later, I drove past our old house, not to look back, but to make sure I didn't feel anything. The curtains were still drawn the way I used to leave them, the garden still overgrown where he promised he'd plant roses. But to me, it all looked smaller now, like it had shrunk the moment I decided to walk away. Sometimes freedom isn't loud or dramatic. It's just the moment you stop waiting for someone else to change. I thought about Sophie then, not with jealousy, but with an odd sense of detachment. Maybe she thought she'd won something. Maybe she believed his attention was love. But she'd soon learn what I already knew. Ethan's promises came cheap, and his loyalty even cheaper. Let her discover that on her own time. I was done teaching lessons to people who never wanted to learn. As I drove away, the sun began to rise behind me, spilling light across the road like a quiet applause. My phone buzzed, his name flashing across the screen again. I turned it face down on the seat beside me and smiled. Let him wonder. Let him sit in the silence he built. Because for the first time in years, my life finally belonged to me, and I wasn't about to share it with a ghost from his past. 6 months later, the sunlight in my new apartment looks different, brighter, softer, like it's learned how to touch me gently again. The mornings are quiet, but not lonely. I've traded shared chaos for my own calm. I make my coffee the way I like it, strong with a hint of cinnamon, and scroll through travel sites while the city hums outside my window. Italy has been calling my name for weeks, and today I finally answer. My cursor hovers over the Book Now button, and I click it without hesitation. My phone buzzes on the table. A text lights up the screen. Ethan, I'm sorry. Please talk to me. I stare at it for a moment, not with anger, not even sadness, just distance. I used to crave closure, but I've learned that peace isn't something he could ever give me. I set the phone face down and smile softly. He spent our money keeping his past alive. I'm using mine to build my future. There's a quiet poetry in that symmetry. When I board the plane 2 weeks later, I carry nothing he ever gave me. No rings, no memories, no guilt. Just myself. And that's enough. The airport smells like fresh coffee and jet fuel, that intoxicating scent of departure and possibility. As I walk through the terminal, I catch my reflection in the glass, shoulders back, eyes steady, a small, content smile. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just exhales.